Hello and welcome to GameWalks. It's Tuesday, February 11th. How you doing tonight, Jim?
Hey, doing good, Matt. How are you?
Good. When are we going to drop the ruse and rename this podcast since there is no longer any walking involved?
No, we have to remain hope that we will return to the walks at some point in the
And I
future.
mean, I'd like to point out it's not because you like got disabled like in a war or something. It's just like, no, we just don't commute together anymore because we don't work at the same
Yeah.
company. So the walking is out.
Well, we'll find a way to make it work. I have confidence
You're
someday.
communicating with me over a mobile phone. Why don't you just pick it up and start walking around your house? Like just walk in circles around your house.
I'm sure that'll be really nice for the viewers.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So you asked me to check out a game that I actually backed on Kickstarter but hadn't had a chance to play recently called the Banner Saga.
Yeah, Banner
A-
Saga.
And I started playing it, and I noticed two things about it. The first thing I noticed is that you unlocked the achievement for beating the game at 4:59 a.m. I think it was even on a weekday.
I may have done that. Yes.
So that's usually a sign that it's a damn good game. And the second thing I noticed is that it took about 10 hours for you to get that achievement. Is that about right?
Gosh, it feels like longer, but maybe it was around 10. I thought it was more like 15 to 20. Uh,
Interesting.
I mean, I had to do a little bit of loading during the end sequence there, so maybe that skewed it a little bit in my mind.
Pretty pretty meaty game for a downloadable title. I think it's being offered on Steam for $15 if you weren't a backer. I mean, that's very
Yeah,
impressive.
I think
It's
I
quite an
backed it
offering.
for 15. It's definitely worth the value in my
Oh
opinion.
yeah, for sure.
And if I had more time, I would definitely replay it because there are a ton of choices throughout the game that could determine the fate of certain, members in your party or different customization options for what type of, units you use in battle and all types of stuff. So I could definitely get multiple play sessions out of it if I didn't have a backlog of, a billion Steam games to try and get through right
I
now.
love games that do that. It's really cool. So what were your impressions? Like, what's the top three things about that game that stick out in your mind? What made it so great for you?
So I mean, the first one for me is just the visual style. Really just drew me in. I mean, especially those opening sequences when you first start to get the kind of panoramic, Oregon Trail walking sequence through the world. It's just a beautiful game to look at. And so that was just a pleasure throughout.
Yeah, it was
Um,
really powerful for me as well. I mean, seeing those panoramas, and maybe it was like the intentionally sparse sound design and the nature sounds, and I don't know, it's very cool. And the sound design sort of supports it as well, and you just feel like you're in winter, and it's very long and drawn out, and you feel like you're going on a long march in
yes.
winter and these beautiful vistas, and it's like intentionally very slow paced, very zoomed out. It makes you feel small, and like the game is, it just takes a stand.
Yeah.
Everything about that game is so stylized and for a reason and a purpose, and it just culminates in this incredible mood that it's just impossible to not get swept away by.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of number one for me. Number two was probably, everything in terms of resources was so kind of sparse that you really had to make some tough decisions about how you spent your, the kind of renown that you're getting, and which characters do you level up and which characters do you use. I really loved that. I love games that keep their economy really tight. And so I think that just forces really interesting player decisions for your customization. I mean, did you feel that as you played through it?
Yeah, it's really interesting that when your character levels up, it's like your character is eligible to level up. Do you want to spend resources to make it happen? It's like, oh,
Yeah,
wow, that's tricky. I don't know.
yeah,
And then it's like, and it's the same exact resource that you spend on supplies to keep your village, your women and children who are not fighters, from dying. It's like, do you want to
yeah,
make this person a better fighter, or do you want to have food for 3 more days? It's
yeah.
really interesting.
So I think some really good decisions there about how you have to spend your resources. And the third thing, I mean, I really like the tactical gameplay. I mean, I'm a big fan of that style, and you don't get a lot of it as much these days. And so that kind of uh, tactical choice, do I move this square over here, one diagonal, or position myself over here? I really liked that sort of thing. And I love their mechanic between the armor and kind of the health, and having to make a decision about whether you kind of soften up someone right now for a later bigger blow, or whether you just kind of go straight for the gut. I liked those kind of choices throughout the actual battle minigame.
Yeah, it was also neat that you had a non-replenishing resource in every battle, and so you have like a couple of extra willpower, I think it was called, where if you
Yeah,
want this attack to really finish him off and do one extra point of damage, you can do that, but you can only do it once or twice during the course of a battle. It's
yeah,
a couple of really interesting mechanics and additions to the turn-based strategy game. If you compare it to something like XCOM, it would feel very familiar, but also, with a lot of innovations and changes.
yeah. No, yeah. I think XCOM's a pretty good comparison. And I felt it was probably, I'm trying to think of it versus XCOM. Would you consider it more hardcore than XCOM?
I would, because XCOM made a lot of sense. Like, no, not from a story standpoint, obviously, but when you fire a gun on someone and you've got a 40% chance to hit them and you decide to use a grenade, it's like there's a lot of options in XCOM and they're all extremely intuitive if you've ever played a first-person shooter. It's like they're just slowing a first-person shooter down and making it turn-based. Whereas this is obviously more like RPG combat, but it doesn't feel like they took an RPG and slowed it down and made it turn-based. Instead, they invented whole new mechanics, which actually are pretty brilliant and play out in a really fun way, but not in a very intuitive way. I feel like I'm always reading tooltips and learning how to play the game.
Yeah, even after playing through the whole game, I definitely feel like there were some abilities that I never fully understood what their function was or how to use them, or certain enemy abilities and certain rules. There were also some ways that you could kind of exploit the game that I found disappointing, like the idea that you could get someone down to like 1 or 2 health, and then they wouldn't really be a threat to you anymore, but they still took up a slot in the turn order. So like you're almost like de-incentivized to kill guys, which I found kind of interesting.
And they
Uh,
actually bring that up in their own tooltips, like in the loading hint screens, so that's not an exploit. They tell you to do that.
well, yeah, they can tell it's a strategy, but I found it very exploitive. Like,
Yeah.
the idea that I would just like soften up someone and then it's just giant guy who really can't hurt me and takes up space on the battlefield.
Because in
Um,
the game, it's very interesting. As you lose health, you also lose attack damage. That's the
yeah,
same
so if you
stat
only
in
have
that
like
game.
2 or 3 health, there's really nothing you can do on the battlefield. Like unless you have some crazy special ability, but most of the AI enemies are kind of crunchies anyway. So once I actually didn't do that for the first half of the game, and I found it much more enjoyable. Then the second half, I was kind of like, wow, some of these tougher battles, I almost need to play into the system, and it felt backwards to me. Like XCOM, it's like you want to finish guys because things are always really dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's what I liked about XCOM is like everything felt dangerous at any point, and like you wanted to make sure that there wasn't some, alien right next to you at any point because that's bad.
Yep.
And so that was the only kind of weird thing I found about kind of their combat system, and it was probably perfectly intentional. It was a little different for me.
I agree. I think hardcore is the right word to describe it because it did fit well within their world, but it was just not intuitive. Was the main thing. All those strategies and be they exploitive or whatever.
Yeah,
One of the major weaknesses for me in the game is actually their storytelling, which is it's a complicated thing for me to break down because I love the world that they've created and I like the characters a lot and the story, and I really love all the choices that you have to make. But they made a conscious decision to have minimal or no voiceover and a lot of pop-ups with text, and simultaneously they made the decision to have you be switching which character you're playing at several points during the course of the
yeah,
game. Or at least I think you are. I mean, I kind of lost the thread on the story a little bit. But because there's no voices for me to associate with, and because I'm never sure which character is me, like when the other characters say, hey, you, I don't
yeah,
know, I'm the big brutish guy, or I'm the clan leader over here, or I'm the emperor's daughter over in this, world. It's very tricky to keep track of the story for me.
yeah. I would totally agree with that. I really wish they had voiceover in the game, especially like in that world with that kind of Viking style. I think could have been really cool.
And they
Um,
had cool sound design,
yeah,
albeit
like
minimal.
obviously with the amount of dialogue and text in that game, I can understand the cost and the operations required to pull off a good voiceover and localization and all that for that type of effort. But yeah, and then also in the storytelling, I mean, if this is still the OMG spoilers thread, there are certain things that aren't really finished in the story for sure. And I don't know if they're going to do future episodes or what there, but there are definitely some areas that didn't really come to an end, and that was kind of weird.
Do you think that they would have if you had made different choices?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
No,
I'm only halfway through it. I've played for about 5 hours.
Or just kind of, they're like, hey, it's this thing, and then you don't really hear about it again for like 10 hours. And also, I was a little bit disappointed, like, they have Oregon Trail moments where, like, if you choose this option, a guy dies. If you choose that option, he doesn't. And you really don't know, like, why one option would do that or another. And I lost some, like, level 5, like, fully ranked up dudes with some really badass equipment because I chose an incorrect, text string out of, like, 5 choices.
Oh, wow.
And that really, like, it was, I mean, it definitely hits you where you're like, wow, that was a decision I made and that had really drastic consequences, that's very powerful from a storytelling perspective, but also felt kind of like, wait a minute, I just spent like 6 hours leveling that guy up. I've put all my resources into him, and he survives, 30 battles or something, and like all that, and then in one little dialogue thing, he just dies. And
yeah, that's a tricky one. That type of stuff, killing off characters, is great and incredibly powerful and emotional when it's based off choices. When it happens in a game like the Telltale games, where you haven't like put stats into this character, and this character is not essential and highly customized for your combat, it's just a character that you're very emotionally invested in, and they die, that's a great moment. But if they're a character that you're very emotionally invested in, and also they're essential to the gameplay because you've specialized them in a certain way and you understand them and how to use them,
yep,
that's a rough one.
Yeah, I lost, I think, probably 2 or 3 like highly ranked up dudes just to random, metagame story things, and that's almost why I'd want to replay the game, is to see if I made different choices, like would those characters survive throughout. So I kind of understand like why they went that direction, but it was also like some of those moments where you're like, oh, damn it.
Yeah, I know.
and also, I mean, I can't really tell if you can like load, like I think it just auto saves throughout. So like even if you really wanted to be like, I really need that guy, I don't really find a way to like load back in the game. So you just kind of keep moving forward, but that's part of the saga, I guess you could say. It's part of the journey.
So what happens next for these guys? No, I mean, the game was obviously well received. Everyone I've talked to really enjoys it. I'm assuming it's getting good sales. They obviously got a lot of money from the Kickstarter as well. Do you think that they're going to be able to make it? Or do you expecting we'll see more from them?
I hope so. I mean, the core team, if you look at the credits, was really only a couple guys, which really impresses me. How they were able to put a game of that scope together.
Yeah,
even if
and that high quality.
Yeah, I mean, even if they did use a bunch of contractors and outsourcing, like that takes a lot of management and overhead and organization, and to get the consistency also throughout in like that type of art style. So that all really impresses me. So obviously these are really talented guys, and they now have the infrastructure for building this franchise, and it should only hopefully get more efficient as they go forward. So I certainly hope they continue in the franchise, and I think they should be able to, probably financially as well. I've no idea, how much of the Kickstarter money they put into this first one and how many extra sales they've gotten from just being out there.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've had some kind of double-edged sword press with the King.com stuff going on.
I know, that's so interesting. Summarize that again for me, because I'm familiar with it.
Obviously, King.com, they want to, trademark the word candy, and they're also trying to trademark Saga, for their franchises. And, even though Banner Saga obviously is in a completely different category of gaming, than what King.com does. I think King is, they see it as a blanket thing where they need to protect their trademarks. So, there's a chance there that they may get into some legal dispute about using the name Saga. I think Stoic has pushed back and said we want to keep using it, and we're going to keep using it until we hear otherwise. So, we'll see what happens there.
I just hate stories like that because the Stoic guys, they can't possibly go. They can't. It's not a fair fight. They can't engage in a legal warfare with a major company.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I think it's good press for them to get out there in a lot of these articles and to put their foot down as kind of indie developers and push back against this huge behemoth now in the games industry. So I think they're getting a lot of points with fans, and I think they're getting a lot of points with the industry to try and stand up for themselves, and that's just good. But if it does come to the point where King.com moves forward legally, I don't think they're going to have a lot of power to defend themselves unless someone comes in and helps them pro bono or something.
Which this is starting to become large enough scale that might actually happen. But I mean, it's a good enough game with a big enough fan base, so you never know.
Yeah, but I hope it doesn't come to that. But I do think that they're getting their names out there. I think that the franchise is getting its name out there. So if they're able to continue with the quality, and also, is the game on mobile yet? I don't think so. Like iPad,
I don't know.
and
yeah, that'd be interesting. It could totally work on iPad the same way that XCOM worked on it.
Perfect game for tablets, for mobile devices, and I mean it could even fit on console the same way that XCOM
was on all of those platforms.
I think they also have a lot of opportunity for this expansion in terms of platforms with the franchise.
In terms of content for sequels, which is just amazing.
I don't know if they're going to focus more on kind of extra content for the PC version first or move it to other platforms, but they have kind of both those avenues. And, I think if you probably look at them 2 or 3 years from now, I would expect them to be on, next-gen consoles and probably mobile and have, a lot of content under their belts. So I hope they keep doing it, because I would love to play more of the franchise. Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, another great game backed on Kickstarter, and thanks for making me check it out. I would have gotten to it eventually. It's been high on my list, but I'm glad that I spent a little bit of time playing it.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. What's next on your list then?
What is next on my list? Probably Broken Age, but okay. I've got a few others up there as well. I started doing a podcast every Sunday where I pick a game at random off my Steam list and play it for an hour.
That's great idea.
Fun.
Yeah. I also tried Papers, Please over the past week and really enjoyed that. That's an emotionally engaging game in a very different aspect than kind of Banner Saga.
All right, well, I'll play Papers, Please, and we can talk about it next week on GameWalks.
Yeah, we can talk about that maybe next week or something.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for joining me again, and think about how we can incorporate more walking into GameWalks.
How could we? Yeah, I could try walking around my house. We could both walk around our respective places and really give people headaches. That would be interesting.
I don't know. We'll think of something. Maybe I could get an animated GIF of a guy walking across the bottom of the YouTube video.
Awesome. All right.
Cool. See you next time.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.